Hello, welcome to another issue of the Cool Tool Show and Tell. Our special guest this week is Jonathan Whitaker. Hey, Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners and watchers?
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Whitaker. I'm an artificial intelligence researcher and consultant based in Portland, Oregon.
Well, welcome, Jonathan. I'm really eager to hear what your favorite tools are. And can you tell us about your first pick?
Sure thing. So I'll start with the one that's the most sort of like a conventional tool. So I have here a Ryobi cordless jigsaw. The exact model I have is, I think it's called the XJ50, but that might be an international version, and I think it's called something slightly different here in the US. So this is a tool that I brought over from where I used to live, Zimbabwe. And the reason I wanted to highlight it, even though I think a jigsaw is pretty well known, is just that in a place with no electricity most of the time and not a lot of resources, I found that the combination of like a jigsaw and a drill, and especially a cordless jigsaw that doesn't need a wall outlet to run.
Is that what this is? This is a cordless. Could you hold that up so we can see the?
So this is a cordless jigsaw. It's based on Ryobi's. I think they call it the 1+ 18-volt lithium battery system.
Right.
And so we could charge those up from our solar panels and then just use it wherever we need it. And so it comes in really handy. And I think I had this perception of a jigsaw as like a really rough, imprecise tool. I think I'd seen, badly made jigsaw puzzles and things like that. But yeah, as soon as you start to use it, you realize that if you've drawn your marks well, and then if you've got a good eye, you can get pretty precise. And with a bit of sanding, you can match something that might be like a circular saw or a table saw job normally. So this, yeah.
And there are a bunch of different cordless jigsaws. Did you do much comparative evaluations of this one to choose it, or is this sort of more like a generic thing, just like a cordless jigsaw? Is your suggestion?
So there's a fair amount around. I do like this one. Obviously, I mean, part of the reason I bought it was just what was available.
Yeah.
But I think key things to look for. So this has, it takes the kind of universal jigsaw blades. And so you can get blades for cutting metal or for cutting wood, more aggressive blades if you want to cut really fast. So make sure that it takes the universal blades. And then also it's nice to have, so for the listeners, I'll show there's a little dial on the side by where the blade is. And that can switch it from a straight up and down cutting motion, which is really nice if you want like fine edges, not too much damage to the material.
Mm-hmm.
But it can also switch into a mode where it moves in a kind of like an epileptic orbit, and that cuts away a lot more material at a time. So if you need to really move fast through, like a sheet of plywood that you're rough cutting, you can switch it onto the more aggressive mode and use a really rough jigsaw blade. And between that, you can cut through material a lot more fast.
So, I mean, I think what you seem to be saying is that this, in some ways, this cordless jigsaw could replace a lot of saws. Like it could replace, like if you need to cut a piece of plywood, you could put a straight edge and use this instead of your skill saw. You could use it instead of a bandsaw. You could use it kind of like if you're going to get one saw, maybe this is the saw you want to get. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. At least as a start. I mean, after a couple of years of using it, there's definitely places where I think, oh, I wish I did have the bandsaw or whatever. But yeah, we built a lot of furniture. My wife and I built our own desks and chairs and some little box drums and things like that. The other nice thing about it is that even like a circular saw is pretty intimidating. I used to like help my friends and family, build stuff. And you hand someone a circular saw, you need to prepare them. It feels really dangerous, like it's going to run away and cut someone's leg off. Somehow the jigsaw feels a little bit more controllable, even though there's still this kind of scary blade. It's never going to run away with you.
Yeah, that is true. So this is the Ryobi 1+, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And it looks like it's $51 right now on Amazon, which is a great bargain because that does not include the battery. But that's a pretty good deal for your one and only saw.
Well, sure. And you can often find like some places will have a starter kit that has like the tool itself and the battery on a discount. But yeah, around $50 for the tool itself. And then if you enter that system, like I have the jigsaw and the drill, and then a friend has the the cordless angle grinder as well. You can have, 1 or 2 batteries and swap them out. It's very convenient to be able to switch in something that's fully charged.
Right. A cordless angle grinder is something I wished I had 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's the second most useful thing ever. So,
it's pretty magical, yeah.
Yeah, I can cut anything, including I was doing it to cut stone, patio stone. It's really easy.
And like up on a roof or something, you don't want to be running cords up the ladder and then along. Yeah, so that's a game changer as well.
Okay, well, that's a great start. So, Jonathan, what's your second pick?
So my second pick kind of sprang out of a pandemic hobby. I think like many of us, I was locked down and looking for things to do. And so what I ended up getting really interested in was spiders, just digging around my yard and trying to figure out what species of spider were there. And to kind of enable that, you often need some magnification because these things are quite tiny. So what I have here is called a Raynox DCR250 macro adapter. And for the listeners, this is like, it looks kind of like a magnifying glass with a frame that has some spring-loaded clips that let you clip it onto the front of a camera lens. So this is not
so you're holding up something that snaps onto the front of like a camera, like an SRL kind of camera, old-fashioned camera that goes onto the front.
Yeah.
That's an additional magnifier to the lens that the camera has.
Exactly. And so normally this is where you would clip like an ND filter or an extra protective layer. So it's compatible with a lot of cameras. I think if you've got anything from like a 50 to a 65 millimeter filter ring, you can clip this on and you can buy adapters for larger things. But the reason that's so useful is that, I mean, it has a bit of magnification itself. You can get some that have even less. But if you pair it with a lens that already has some zoom, the trick is that it lets you focus on things that are really close by. So for example, my camera is just a point and shoot sort of bridge camera. There's no interchangeable lenses. But if I zoom in to full zoom, normally that has to be, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet away at the nearest focus. Whereas with this, I can clip the little macro adapter on and suddenly something that's, 10 centimeters away or 20 centimeters away, I can focus on that. And so that combination of a zoom lens with this thing that lets it focus close by, it's kind of shocking how good the macro capabilities are. And it's a lot cheaper than going to like a dedicated macro lens.
Right. So presumably they have different versions of this for different cameras. You have a Lumix super zoom, which this fits on, and presumably there would be alternatives if you had, I don't know what the current alternatives are, so Sony or whatever. Is that right? Or does one fit everything?
It's pretty much one size fits all. If you have a massive lens, like a giant, wildlife lens or something, then the filter ring would be like a 100 millimeter filter and it wouldn't fit. But I'd say almost every camera and lens that's just in the general like mid-range hobby use, because it's sort of spring loaded, it just clips into whatever rim you've got. So it's very universal. And then even if it's a smaller lens, the insides you can unscrew and you've got a 43 millimeter. It's another standard mounting. So between the different like adapters that you can buy, the actual lens itself is almost universal.
Okay. And it looks like it's about $70. And the idea is that you could get really close. So how, like inch away, how close could you actually get?
You can't get like an inch away. I'd say probably about 6 inches is the minimum.
Okay.
To maybe about 12.
Okay.
But within that, it also depends on what your base camera lens is. So if you have a like a high zoom lens, maybe it's a little further away or a little closer, depending on your optics. But it's definitely much more workable than something that's, you have to be 2 meters away from the subject.
But can you also, if you have a zoom in, can you also retreat the zoom to make it more of a standard or normal and use it? Does it also use it and allow you to be closer if you have the setting much more like a wide angle lens?
Yeah. So my camera goes down to the equivalent of like a 20 millimeter lens.
Yeah.
And at that super wide angle, the Raynox does have a bit of a vignette.
Okay.
But in the center, you can get really close and you can get some really nice, almost like fisheye macro of, some larger insect or something. So I can share my screen to show a bit of the just what the magnification is. Obviously, it's variable. So this is like a honeybee for the listeners.
Wow, it's
Maybe
very,
taking
very,
notes.
yeah. So we're
Yeah,
seeing a profile of a honeybee on some purple flowers, and it's very crisp, very intimate, very close. Looks like it's maybe, I don't know, 4 inches away. That's what it feels like.
yeah. And the bee takes about maybe half the field of view. So this is at
Yeah.
actually quite a wide angle on the base camera.
Okay.
And then if you zoom in, so this is a shot that I took just to illustrate what the kind of higher zoom levels look like. So this is the tip of a ballpoint pen, and
Wow.
from the like base where the final nib pokes out to the end of the ballpoint where the actual ball is most of the height of the image. Um, and there's a tiny little spider whose body is about the size of the actual ball in the rollerball pen.
Yeah, yeah.
And you
Wow,
can
that's
see all the detail,
yeah. So the
which
yeah, the ball point pen, it looks like it's like, a fire hydrant. It's it's really substantial and incredibly close. So that's more than just 6 inches away. That's like an inch away.
yeah, so this it effectively becomes like a microscope, like a really high magnification microscope, which is I think one of the reasons why this macro photography got so exciting for me is because things that you would otherwise just say, oh, it's a little speck, right? The spider is maybe two
Right.
millimeters across. When you zoom that up to fill the frame, you suddenly realize that there's all this detail and color and nuance.
Mm,
Um, Now, I will say with a lens like this, at that high of a magnification, the focal
very
plane
shallow
is
focal length.
very, very shallow. If you use it with a smaller sensor camera, like mine doesn't have a full frame camera, a full frame sensor, it's just the smaller
Yeah.
APS-C. You do get a bit more depth of field, but it's still like any slight motion of your hand. You've maybe got like a millimeter of depth
Yeah.
between, being out of focus. So you have to probably use a flash to freeze the motion. You can do things like focus stacking to get more of the image over multiple
Yeah.
passes. But it's much easier to use if you use like a slightly wider angle lens, less zoom, and then it's really nice.
So does this contraption also fit onto a prime lens, the fixed lens, if you had those? Would that also work on those?
Yes, so you lose the ability to go in and out, but it does give you that closer focus and that increased magnification. So
Yeah.
I know people use them with like a 100 millimeter lens, and they add this on the front. And for like macro shots of flowers and things like that, you get some incredible photos.
Yeah. Well, that's really great. A one size fits all magnifier, macro magnifier. That's really cool. And that's called the
Yeah,
Raynox DCR 250 Super Macro. It's a
yeah.
snap-on lens.
They have the Raynox 150 as well. So if you have a lens with a lot of zoom and it's too much extra magnification, you can get one that just does the bringing the focus closer.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Okay, Jonathan, what's the third tool that you'd hate to lose?
So moving from spider photography to music, another pandemic hobby, I have this is the Roli Seaboard Rise. So what I'm holding up, it looks like a keyboard layout, right? Like a 49 key piano keyboard, but the entire surface is this sort of squishy neoprene rubber texture,
Okay,
continuous surface.
yeah, so it's
Um,
about two
and
feet
so this is an
long.
instrument that,
It's about 2 feet long. It's maybe just an inch thick.
yeah,
It looks like, yeah, kind of like a keyboard, a extended keyboard, but very thin.
very thin
Um,
but surprisingly heavy, which is why I put it back down. It
uh-huh.
really feels like a beefy premium piece of
Oh,
equipment.
instead of having
Um,
these distinct keys, it has this rubber membrane. And what's the advantage of that?
so with a normal piano, you're limited to these discrete notes, and some of them have a little pitch wheel or something on the side that you can use to bend, but it's very unintuitive. Whereas with the Seaboard, because it's this continuous playing surface, it registers touch and pressure, and it uses a standard called MPE, which is MIDI polyphonic expression, so that you can use those movements and that nuance to control the sound. So, for example, I can play a note and then I can just slide it down to a lower note. And it's because it's a continuous surface and it's tracking that touch, you can just control that pitch as much as you'd like. And so if you'd like to be very expressive, like emulating a cello, you can wiggle your finger to do some vibrato. You can push harder to get a more aggressive sound. So it's designed to be a lot more of an expressive musical instrument versus just a piano, which is kind of on and off, maybe how hard you hit it.
Okay. So there's more nuance in the pressure and the relation between the pressure and the sound.
Yeah.
And is this for composing music? Is it performance or for both?
I'd say for both. If you watch their promotional videos, which are all excellent, you'll get the idea that you can straight away jump on and shred a guitar lick and switch to pretending to be a saxophone jazz player. What you have to realize is that the people playing those are really skilled. It does have a bit of a learning curve as an instrument. For me, what I found it's most suited for is, I guess you call it like sound design, right? I'm less focused on a perfect performance of a piano piece. It's more about like when I play a chord, between their software and this expressive control that you have, you can really just get layers upon layers of different like nuance and expression within just a couple of notes that are being held, but they're moving slightly, they're pulsing. As you shift up the keyboard, it changes to like a bit more overtones. So I know a lot of film scores and like sound designers use it as a way to just explore sound and to automate that in a way that you can't do with just a standard MIDI input.
And again, this is called a Seaboard, right? Rise?
Yes. Seaboard Rise 2. So Roli have had a long history of making instruments like this. They kind of created the genre in a sense. So they had the original Seaboard, I think they called it the Seaboard Grand and the Seaboard Rise. And so they've been iterating on that since. They do have some smaller versions, which are a little bit cheaper and more accessible. But this is their latest product, and it's kind of, I think, the best, in the middle of their range, does everything you'd want. You're not going to feel the limits, unlike the smaller ones.
And it's $1,400.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, in your eyes, does it replace your normal keyboard? Is it that versatile that or do you also have a regular keyboards as well? Is it supplemental or does it replace?
I would say it's supplemental. If you get this as your only instrument and then you try and play piano songs, I think you will find it's different enough. So I think some people get disappointed by that. Oh, I can't play this as well as I can play my piano. You really have to treat it as a different instrument. It's like a separate category. I have a standard MIDI keyboard now as well. But this is, it's its own thing. It's way more money than I've ever paid for any other instrument. I'm usually like the make it out of PVC for free end of the spectrum of musicians. So this really felt like, okay, but if you realize that this is its own sort of unique instrument, it's got a lot of software that comes bundled. It sort of sits supplementary. Maybe if you're a musician who's already got some other gadgets, this is a really nice addition.
Okay, that's really great. So Jonathan, we're on to your fourth tool. Tell us about that one.
Cool. So maybe I'll share my screen again. My fourth tool is a software tool. So switching away from physical things. It has a free version. It's basically just a website. And it's a product called Google Colab. So if you go to colab.research.google.com, what you get is a way of writing software that I think is a really nice break from the traditional method. So normally when you write software, you'd write a bunch of source code in one or more files, and you'd finish writing the code, and then you'd run the file, or maybe you have to compile it and then run it, and then see the output somewhere separate. Whereas what a notebook does, and so this is called a Jupyter notebook.
Wait. A notebook is the unit that you get in a collab. So
yes.
So collab is that a variety? Is that a brand name? Are there more than one collabs? Does Google have one and someone else doesn't? Or is that a Google thing?
So I'd say the class of things is like a notebook editors.
Okay.
Just like you have text editors. So this is a way of editing this kind of code document.
And notebook,
Google Colab.
And a notebook is the new thing that is the genre, is the notebook.
Yeah. So you have one notebook that you're editing, and that's like a document. And this is like the Google Docs of these code environments.
Okay, and but the class of them is called notebooks.
Yes.
All
So
right.
like Jupyter Notebook is the underlying technology.
Okay.
Um, and the reason I love it is that you can have text and images and markdown formulas interleaved with code. And when you run it, you don't run the whole thing at once. You're running section at a time and you're seeing the intermediate outputs right there in the notebook alongside the code and the explanation. And so as a teaching tool, these are pretty invaluable because you can say, we've done a few steps. Let's look at what this output looks like. We can plot a graph of it. We can play with it. Then you read the next section that's explaining what you're going to do next. You visualize something. You have the output right there. And so it's kind of I call it exploratory programming. It's much less like write once, run once, and then see the outputs. It's much more interacting with the data. It's used a lot for machine learning. So you have a model, you test it out, you change something, you test it again. And yeah, as a learning tool to be able to give someone that experience where they have everything together and they can tweak it and edit it.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a very powerful
So,
technology.
so you mentioned teaching and then you mentioned machine learning. So it sounds like it's good for students and it's good for a professional like yourself. Um, why aren't more people using it? Or what's the disadvantages to it?
So it is taking off. I think there's a lot of resistance to changing how you edit software because software developers are always very opinionated about their setups, and we all have our favorite editors and extensions and so on. So its usage is definitely growing, and I think especially in like educational environments or so one of the places I've seen this explode is in the AI art scene. You have all these people tinkering and generating images and so on with these models. Um, the other difficulty with doing that the traditional way is that you have to download everything onto your computer. You have to get all of the environment set up such that you have the right programming language installed and the right models downloaded. So Google Colab, in addition to being like the notebook editor, it also runs a computer in the cloud that all the code runs on. And so you have this like standardized environment where I can say, look, I wrote it so that it runs in Colab. That means anyone can run it and they'll have the same environment in the backend,
Right.
the same compute power.
So you don't have to load instance of that onto your computer. You can use the hosted version that the notebook has, and it'll be the
Exactly.
same one that everybody else is sharing, the same version, I guess, as well.
Yeah. There are different tiers, like you can have a larger graphics card if you need to do more advanced, like deep learning or something. And so then they have a pay-as-you-go credit system, or you can have a
Mhm.
subscription. So you can get, more or less powerful computers behind the scenes. But yeah, for just basic exploration or learning, it's free and everyone can access the same platform.
So that's really cool. But one of the other kind of trends in coding right now that everybody seems to be using is things like Copilot, where you are using the AI to help you write the code. Does this integrate with those AI tools as well? Those AI scripting tools?
So it's funny you mentioned that. I'd recently shifted away from Google Colab back to my local notebooks simply for that Copilot AI assistant. But Google have just integrated their own code assistant back into Colab. And so now if you're unsure how to do something, it has, the little cell where you'd normally
Yeah.
write your code. It has a generate with AI button. And instead of writing the code, you can say, display the image and resize it to 500
Mhm.
pixels and it'll write the code for you. It's not perfect, but it's yeah,
But
it's a nice little assistant.
AI. Um, so it sounds like this would be a really great place for someone learning how to code. Like, say you wanted to do web development. Um, this would be a. Would you recommend that the person begin here with a notebook?
Um, so it depends on the task. If you were doing web development, there's similar online systems where you have a easy setup environment and you can run the code. Like Replit is the one I'd recommend for
Which
for
one? It's
web.
called what?
It's called Replit,
Oh, Replit.
Replit.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So Colab is mostly focused on Python. And it's really designed around the Python ecosystem and especially for like machine learning. So if you were coming to learn machine learning, I'd say go straight to Colab, run some notebooks, see
Yeah.
some examples from people.
Mhm.
For something like web development, they're similar tools, but this isn't oriented around that kind of ecosystem.
And just so I understand, because I'm not a coder, does that mean you cannot use, whatever it is, Java in this notebook that only does Python, or that it's not suited for? Or what do you mean by this preference?
So behind the scenes, there's a whole computer running. So you can, in theory, get other things going, like all the normal Linux tools, or you could run a web server and serve JavaScript,
Mhm.
but it's not optimized for that. The notebook, as its sort of defaults, is designed for specifically writing Python code and interacting with it. And so all of the Copilot, all of the user interface, and the kind of defaults is that the
Mhm.
expectation is you're writing Python code and you're interacting with that. They do have an R version. Other notebooks can run Julia and a few other languages. But
Okay.
the assumed focus is that you're writing Python
Right.
code.
So right now there's kind of a bias to language, so you can have different language notebooks, basically, what it comes down
Yeah.
to first approximation. Okay. So and is there a free version for the Google Colab?
Yes. So originally, when it launched, it was free for everyone, and you could always access the GPU, which for many of my colleagues back in Zimbabwe, that was the only access we had to kind of accelerated computing for deep learning. So it still remains free, and you can access a lower tier graphics
Mm-hmm.
unit in the free tier. But because of the popularity and everyone using it to generate their pictures of their dog or whatever, they've limited access to the more powerful GPUs to the paid tier. But I'd say you can definitely start on the free one, and only if you find, oh, I'm really hitting the limits of what I can do on the free
Mm-hmm.
one, or I really want to run things for longer, run more experiments
Mm-hmm.
overnight. That's when you would upgrade to the Pro subscription or the Pro Plus.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds pretty standard. So that's great. Yeah. And then Replit is the one that you might want to seek out, a notebook version you might want to seek out if you're doing more traditional, not traditional, but kind of basic web stuff, JavaScript.
Yeah. Yeah, so Replit's also lovely. I mean, I could just as easily have put that as one of my picks, because it also has, it sets up the environment for you. It has they call it Ghostwriter, the AI assistant
Mm-hmm.
that's really powerful. And so there you have, you edit your code, you see your web page or whatever straight away, and they support a whole bunch of different languages. So it's slightly different focus, but yeah, also a really lovely tool.
Okay, well, great. Well, the general tool then is a notebook environment for writing code. So thank you for those. That's really great. So Jonathan, we have a couple of minutes available. Would you like to share with us any kind of project that you're working on or cause that you would like to champion? Something you'd like to personally recommend?
So I don't have any specific personal project that I can push, although if people are interested, I'm trying to work on my YouTube channel and get more educational content out. So you can follow me on Twitter or whatever if you'd like to find that.
Well, tell
Um,
us a little bit about what your YouTube channel covers.
so whatever I'm interested in at the moment tends to overflow into YouTube videos. And so for a while, that was the image generating type of deep learning model,
Yeah,
shifting over into the language space now. But
language, you
next
mean like
week
a
it
large
could
language
be,
model.
yes, yeah. So some large language model stuff. I'll do some 3D graphics stuff in the coming
Mhm.
months. Um,
Are these tutorials or are these just more of a showcase of your project? Are these kind of a maker thing? Give me a little bit more of a sense of.
yeah, these would be tutorials, very, very deep and technical. So I would say probably not applicable to most people. But if you're really into machine learning and you want to do some deep dives, that's a good place. But if I had to plug something, I'd say more generally, like it's a really fun time to be getting into coding and deep learning. And so even if you're not interested in like the really deep code applications, try out some of these things. Like Google Colab's really approachable. There's lots of online demos where you can interact with these models. And yeah, I think it's quite a fun field to be getting into.
Right.
So yeah.
Coming back to the notebooks, I've heard. I remember very early on that you could download someone else's notebook to do some AI-ish thing. So there was very early on, you were downloading notebooks was one of the ways that you actually had access to this before they were public. Is that still something where you actually have someone else's notebook as a thing and you download it and use it like a software app almost?
Yes, so you can share just natively in the, like if you're using something like Colab, and if you're using a local one, it's just a file, like any other text file. And it's really fun. You get these lineages, someone writes some code in one notebook, somebody else copies that and adds a bunch of things. You can make little user interfaces where I hide a bunch of code and instead you just see like a slider and a button. And so then you have these, like, especially in the AI art community, Disco Diffusion version 8.1, which is based on this person's notebook from this, which is based on that person's notebook from that, which is so everyone's just mixing and sharing. It feels very much like, early days of free software or something where just everything's open source, everything's shared and public, and everyone's copying and pasting and figuring out how to make it work without being necessarily too technical.
Okay. All right. So do you have notebooks to share yourself?
Sure. I can link to one or two that are like introductory tutorial style things.
Okay.
Yeah.
All righty. That'd be great. We'll put those in the show notes if you send them to us. Well, this has really been fantastic, Jonathan. Thank you for your tools, for sharing, taking time to share with us.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And it's been surreal being on the show that I listened to, and it's also influenced my last month or so. Everything I interact with is like, oh, I wonder how I would describe this on Cool Tools, or oh, that's a really nice tool, I must make a note of that. It's been a really fun experience.
I appreciate being introduced to the world of notebooks, which I knew very little about, but I think it's a really cool tool, and others can run with it. So thank you again for sharing. We appreciate it. This year, our Cool Tools blog will be 20 years old, which means we've been posting something new every day for 20 years. It's only possible because of the very engaged and knowledgeable readers and listeners like yourself. You've kept this place going, and we are very grateful for you. With this idea of 20 years in mind, we decided to try an experiment this year, and I'm inviting our guests and listeners to join me on our Cool Tool Show and Tell, which is the program that you're listening to right now. So if you feel you'd make a good guest on this podcast and have 4 uncommon tools that you'd like to share with us, please sign up on our form on the website, and we'll see about inviting you. You must be comfortable talking on a video, and you need to have some tools that you can show. We record on, as you know, on Zoom. We do a YouTube version, a video version of it, as well as an audible version. Fill out the form if you're interested, and list your 4 cool tools, and we'll see if there's a good fit. The applications aren't guaranteed in any way, and we're looking at tools that are new to us and appropriate tools, and whether the times will work for you. So we're really interested in hearing from people all over the world, not just in the US, although the tools have to be available online, easily available online. And if you are a longtime listener, you kind of know what the definition of our tools are. They're very broad. They can be anything that's handy, from something in the kitchen to something you use to travel, to a workshop, to something professional that we may not know about. We're really interested in things that we don't know anything about. So this is an open invitation. We'll give it a try. If you think you make a good guest for this podcast, fill out the form. There'll be a link somewhere on our website. And we look forward to chatting with you. Thank you.